Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael and we're going to be getting right back into some more Reddit stories. If you enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Now, without further ado, let's begin. This story was created by a user named IntelligentChain87. It's titled AITAH for falling in love with my late best friend's husband. Hello everyone. English is not my native language, so I apologize in advance for any mistakes I may make. I, 32F, fell in love with my late best friend's husband, 36M, this summer. I know it sounds terrible, but please let me explain. First, a little backstory. And yes, prepare yourself to stay here for a while. My late best friend, let's call her Amber, and I had known each other since elementary school. When I moved to middle school, I met another friend, let's call her Ursula. Ursula and Amber were already best friends by the time I met Ursula, so I became the third in the group. 2 years before the end of high school, Ursula moved to another city, which brought Amber and me even closer. We witnessed the beginnings of our relationships with our future husbands. Both of us started dating our future husbands around the same year, and both were in long-distance relationships. My husband, then boyfriend, let's call him Adam, was studying in another city, and her husband, then boyfriend, let's call him Thomas, was studying in another country. We supported each other even though our own friendship was also long distance since we were studying in different countries. I was in our home country and she was in a neighboring one. I lost touch with Ursula for a while, but after we graduated from university, the three of us were together again in our hometown along with our then boyfriends, later husbands. Ursula's husband, let's call him Patrick, also dated her since school. Right after graduating, Thomas proposed to Amber, and a few months later, Patrick and Ursula got engaged. Half a year later, Adam proposed to me, and we all celebrated our weddings in the same year. Everyone was happy. 2 years later, Amber and Thomas decided to move to another country. In that same year, Adam and I moved to another city, while Ursula and Patrick stayed in our hometown and had a beautiful child. For context, our husbands weren't best friends and didn't really hang out outside of our group meetings, but they could have fun when we were all together. Given that, it's important to understand that when we all moved to different places, our communication was long distance again. Our husbands saw each other about once a year, just like we did, since it's hard for married couples to gather. I was more friends with Patrick than with Thomas because when Amber and Thomas moved abroad and we hadn't yet moved to another city, I would often visit Ursula and Patrick at their home. Thomas and I had plenty to talk about. We could laugh heartily and congratulate each other on holidays, but we weren't particularly close. Another 2 years later, I went through a very dark period. My husband died, I had a miscarriage from the stress, and I almost lost my parents, though thankfully they are okay now. The final blow came a few months later when we were informed that Amber and her child died during childbirth. It was a true shock. 4 terrible events in a year, 3 of which devastated me so much that I could barely function. The last time I saw Thomas was at Amber's funeral, but I don't remember much because I was just existing, not living. A year after Amber's funeral, with the help of family and friends, I finally decided to go to therapy because my parents lived in constant fear that I would follow my husband and friend. I love my parents deeply and didn't want to cause them pain, so I agreed to therapy. I didn't believe it would help, but after another year, I embarked on a solo journey to rediscover myself. It's worth mentioning that when Amber and my husband were still alive, Adam and I visited Amber and Thomas in their country, where we met their local friends and became close with them. 2 of Amber's local friends, Elizabeth and Sasha, supported me and Ursula after Amber's death. And when I set out on my solo trip, I stayed with them along the way. I didn't see Thomas at that time, nor did I want to, as we would have just reminded each other of the pain of loss. That's how I started my new life, with travel and rediscovering myself in my new situation. I was still crying at night, but I felt the pain slowly settling somewhere deep. Of course, it will never go away completely, but I learned to live with it, to live again, to be happy again, to have fun, to make friends, and to love again. Another year later, I dared to go on my first date, and after another year, I started a relationship with a colleague, let's call him Neil. Unfortunately, our relationship wasn't as rosy as it seemed, and at first I didn't notice the red flags, but once I did, I broke it off immediately. The relationship lasted for almost 6 months. This brings us to June of this year. Elizabeth, Amber's friend from abroad, suggested we take a tour through Italy. After checking our schedules and finances, we booked the dates for about a week at the end of July and the beginning of August. A week later, she informed me that Sasha, the other friend, and their husbands wanted to join us. We were thrilled. The more, the merrier. In early July, a couple of weeks before the trip, I went back to my hometown to visit my parents and relatives. That day, I was walking to my grandmother's house and stopped by the supermarket to pick up something for dessert. Imagine my surprise when someone tapped me on the shoulder, and when I turned around, I saw Thomas. Honestly, I felt a whirlwind of emotions that were hard to understand at first. There was joy from seeing him, pain from the reminder of the past, and awkwardness from the unexpected meeting. At first, I didn't recognize him, just as he didn't recognize me, as it turned out later. We exchanged bits of information about our new lives, and I learned that he was also visiting his parents. It felt like we were getting to know each other all over again. I was in a hurry to get to my grandmother's, so we quickly said our goodbyes, expressed how happy we were to see each other, and went our separate ways. I thought that would be the last time I saw him, but a couple of hours later, he messaged me saying he was truly glad to see me and wouldn't mind meeting up again, not just with me, but also with Ursula and Patrick. As you can understand, after Amber's tragic death, he cut ties with everyone close to her, even her parents, except for friends from the country where they lived and where he still lives. Ursula, like me, was surprised by Thomas's reappearance in our lives, but we agreed to his proposal to meet. The next day, we gathered at Ursula and Patrick's house. I swear, the first 2 hours of that meeting were painfully awkward and uncomfortable. Ursula and I tried to keep the conversation going, but the silence from Thomas was cutting through us. Then, after 2 hours, once the alcohol had loosened Thomas's tongue, we were slowly sipping wine. He finally opened up to us and shared that he had come back to our hometown for a reason. All these years, he had just suppressed his pain, drowning it in work, sports, video games, and then he started partying and dating random women, barely seeing or talking to his friends and family. I had heard something like that, but never asked Elizabeth or Sasha for details. Earlier this year, he accidentally came across my Instagram. He had deleted Instagram right after the tragic events, and after restoring it, he created a new account, and saw that I was in a happy, or so it seemed from Instagram, relationship. He immediately felt inadequate, considering we had gone through similar tragedies, but I had learned to live again while he was just burning through life, spending it mostly on work, random women, and alcohol. Those were his words. In a way, that was his wake-up call, and he realized he couldn't live like that anymore. Thomas started therapy, resumed full communication with friends, then with his sister and parents. The hardest part was finally acknowledging and accepting his feelings and emotions about the tragic loss of his beloved wife and their newborn child. He spent weeks visiting places that held special meaning to them and cried. Then he finally mustered up the courage to speak to and apologize to her parents, who had been like second parents to him. That's the main reason he came back to our hometown. But unfortunately, he still hadn't been able to visit them. He had tried for 2 weeks, but each time he turned back halfway. We all cried. After calming down, he said he had planned to visit Ursula and Patrick, but didn't expect to see me. He even regretted suggesting the meeting, but was ultimately glad it had happened. Ursula and I offered to go with him to visit Amber's parents, as we used to visit them often. On the appointed day, Ursula couldn't make it because her youngest son fell ill, so Thomas and I went alone. As soon as we walked through the door, tears filled Amber's mother's eyes, and so did ours. Her parents weren't angry at all because they completely understood him. We spent a very touching time together, crying, reminiscing about all the good memories with Amber, then laughing, then crying again, and so on until midnight. After thanking Amber's parents and saying goodbye, Thomas offered to walk me home. On the way to my parents' house, we passed a tall building where teenagers used to love hanging out on the roof. He said he wanted to do something and needed my support one last time. I agreed and we went up to the roof. There, he pulled a letter out of his pocket, which turned out to be a farewell letter to Amber. I couldn't hold back my tears as he spoke aloud to the sky, the stars, and her. After reading the letter to the end, he burned it and scattered the ashes in the wind. We silently descended, and just as silently, he walked me home, where we said goodbye and went our separate ways. About a week later, he wrote to me again. He thanked me for my help and said how proud he was of me. I responded in kind. And then we stopped talking again for a few days until I noticed that he had followed me on Instagram. I followed back, and a few hours later, he messaged me asking, "Is it true that you're going on a tour of Italy with my friends?" I replied that yes, I was. He simply wished us a good trip since there was less than a week left before the tour. We continued to chat about various topics, and I started feeling like I used to a long time ago, when we laughed together over trivial things. A couple of days before the vacation, we had our first call and talked almost all night. As I mentioned before, it felt like we were getting to know each other all over again. And then the vacation dates came. The whole group met in Milan, and then we drove to Naples. To our great surprise, Thomas met us there. His uncle lived there and kindly offered us his house for a few days. Whether it was the magic of Italy or we just felt that comfortable around each other, we spent all those days together talking, drinking, laughing. We had 3 amazing days in Naples and then went to Sicily for a day and then to Florence for 4 days. It was in Florence where something happened that has been haunting my conscience. The married couples in our group got tired of all the sightseeing by the 3rd evening in the city, but Thomas and I still wanted to explore. So we went out for a walk near our hotel. After 2 hours, we were tired, so we sat on a bench overlooking the Arno River. For the entire trip, we hadn't been alone until that night. The atmosphere of the evening led to a more intimate conversation, and we shared our fears about relationships. We talked about how our future partners might never understand that we would always love Amber and Adam because they were literally the loves of our lives, and that there would always be a place for them in our hearts. It's hard to explain, but I think people who have lost loved ones would understand. That night, for the first time, I realized that I no longer saw him as Amber's husband. From that moment on, he was a separate man for me, and I found myself attracted to him. I was horrified by my own thoughts and hurried to stand up, eager to return to the hotel. But Thomas didn't want to rush back, and he convinced me to stay a bit longer, saying that he loved the evening and wanted to enjoy a little more time there. I agreed, and we sat in silence for another 10 minutes before he started talking again. He began by saying that I didn't owe him anything and that I just needed to listen to him. I tensed, and Thomas confessed that he had fallen in love with me. He told me that during our time together on the trip, he realized that we could try to have a relationship because it felt as natural as breathing to be with me. He said he understood how complicated our situation was, but he was certain that we deserved to be happy. He felt that I had the same feelings for him, which is why he decided to confess. I didn't know what to say. I liked him a lot, and I couldn't deny that, but the complexity of the situation and my own conscience were eating me alive over feelings I couldn't control. I only responded that once we parted ways, these feelings would fade and we would forget about them, that it was all just the magic of Italy, and it would be better if we didn't make any mistakes. I saw how disappointed his eyes became, but he just agreed and suggested we return to the hotel. Our rooms were nearly adjacent, and we parted in silence. But I couldn't sleep that night. Around 2 in the morning, I wanted to get some fresh air and decided to go to the hotel's courtyard. At the same time, Thomas had the same idea, and we met in the hallway of our floor. I wanted to go back to my room, but he said, "Let's talk." I understood that we needed to put everything in its place, so I agreed. We both went out to the courtyard and sat down. He asked why I was afraid to admit my feelings, and I replied that I feared being judged by others, our friends, our family, because I was Amber's best friend. It would be wrong, primarily in relation to her. Then he asked me if I would be afraid if we were just 2 strangers who fell in love. And I realized that no, I wouldn't be afraid, that all my fear came from the judgment of others and my own conscience. But still, we weren't strangers, and we had a shared history that we couldn't ignore. He just asked for one chance for these feelings, and if fate had decided to bring us together in this way, who were we to go against it? He promised that until we were firmly certain of our relationship, we wouldn't tell anyone. Inside, shame and affection for Thomas were battling, but that night affection won and we kissed. I would be lying if I said I didn't like it. I shut my brain off for just a moment, and at that time, the kiss seemed like the right and most necessary thing in the world. But then I stopped us and returned to my room, saying that I just couldn't do this. The next day, he said that work was calling him back, and he left. I spent the rest of the vacation with the group as planned. I tried to hold it together, but a few days before the trip ended, I told everything to Elizabeth and Sasha. They weren't surprised by our feelings and said we were a great match, and it would be foolish to deny it. They told me that I should choose myself and my happiness because I deserved it. So did Thomas after all these years of suffering. My soul and conscience were somewhat soothed. But everything changed when I shared the story with Ursula. She accused me of betraying Amber, her parents, and said I was going to ruin everything with my fleeting infatuation. Those words really hurt me, and now I don't know what to do. My affection for Thomas is not fleeting, and neither is his for me, but I can't deny the fact that many people would see our feelings as wrong. Even I doubt whether it's worth it, or if I should forget everyone else and try for my own happiness. Thomas and I haven't talked to each other since. I know he's definitely offended by me, but I don't want to get involved with him until I'm 100% sure of my decision. User Alexa19 said, "You, like everyone else, deserve happiness and love in your life. Thomas and you are not cheating on your respective spouses, nor are you betraying them or their memories. You absolutely should forget about everyone else's opinions. You and Thomas are the only people who matter in this relationship. Don't let misplaced guilt rob you of the rest of your life, but live it." User Educational Goose said, "You are not cheating on your spouses. You did not have a crush while you were married and now find the opportunity to get together. You don't need to tell anyone about your relationship until you are sure about your feelings. If you decide to make it official, then what others think is not important. You both have had very devastating experiences and deserve to be happy. I think only you can understand your situation, not Ursula or other people around you. So give it a try." User Queen of the Universe said, "Do you think Amber would want you happy? If she was a true friend, and it sounds like she was, she would rejoice in your happiness. That two people she loved would find healing moving forward together. That's how I would look at it. Ursula hasn't been through what the two of you have. She hasn't lost her love. She lost a friend, and it sounds like she hasn't really grieved for it. She has to go her own way, you have to go yours. Move forward. Enjoy life because you know how short it is, and so does he." User Easy Material said, "One of my dearest friends passed away at 32. She was married with 3 kids. My friend's husband and her best friend turned to each other during the grieving process. They ended up getting married and seemed to have a very strong relationship and connection. You are not betraying anyone. Please don't let anyone make you feel this way. You and Thomas both are entitled to find love and happiness again." User Vivid Frame said, "Ursula can kick spiny rocks. Amber loved you, Adam loved you. You loved them both dearly. They are both gone and nothing can change that. Would either of them want you to stay single? If you and Thomas had passed, would you be happy that the two people you loved most found love together? You didn't just move on him the second you found out, and neither did Thomas. This sounds like fate. You both had healed as much as you can and just met. If this is true, please don't lose this relationship because of Ursula. Truly, you should just date and see how it goes with no ghosts attached. You may make it, you might not, but you owe it to yourself to try. Please try." About a week later, OP provided an update. I'm not sure how to make updates here, so I've decided to put this in a separate post. I'm sorry I haven't replied to anyone, but it's been quite an emotional week with several significant events. First of all, I want to thank everyone who shared their opinions regarding my story. Your comments gave me a lot to think about. Secondly, if this post turns out to be long again, I apologize, but I feel like I owe it to you to tell you what I've decided in the end. For the past 2 weeks, I've been in my hometown, mainly because of my goddaughter who started school this year, and I just had to be there for her first day. At the beginning of the week, I had a conversation with my cousin, my goddaughter's mom, and she asked me about my trip to Italy. During the conversation, I mentioned Thomas a few times because he was there too. It's important to note that my cousin has a good sense or intuition about relationships. Back when Adam and I were just friends, she told me that I should pay attention to him, as he was a wonderful person and would be a great husband in the future. As you know, she wasn't wrong, and Adam truly was a wonderful husband and a great person. She has made similar predictions for others close to her, and she's always been right. So her next words caught me off guard. My cousin, who doesn't know about the situation between me and Tom, said that we looked like a couple in love in the photos. She meant the ones I posted in my Instagram stories, and that maybe I should consider him because we have a similar story and we would make a great couple. When she finished speaking, I just let out a nervous laugh and said nothing. She was distracted by her older daughter, and we didn't return to the conversation, but her words stuck with me. I realized I couldn't keep dragging this situation out, and I had to make a decision. First of all, I talked to my parents. My mom was neutral about the situation, saying it was up to me to decide. My dad and I had a longer conversation, and in the end, he, like many of you in the comments, advised me to talk to Amber's parents. Dad, like mom, believes it's up to me and Thomas to decide how to proceed. But for my conscience, I had to talk to her parents. Gathering my courage a few days ago, I finally decided to visit Amber's parents. I felt like I was acting strangely, as about 10 minutes after I arrived, Amber's mom asked me what was bothering me so much. I couldn't tell her everything at once, so I sat in the bathroom for a while trying to calm down. I still don't understand why I was so nervous. But after calming myself down, I told her everything. Imagine my surprise when Amber's mom said that Thomas had come to see them the day before for the same reason. For the second time that week, I was speechless. She just took my hands and said she wished us nothing but happiness, as Amber would have wanted the same for us, as would Adam. She said that Ursula and I had always been like daughters to her, and our well-being would always be as important to her as Amber's was once. I started crying. After calming down, I thanked her for her kind words and told her she had been like a second mom to me too. We had some tea, talked, and I went home. On the way, I wanted to call or text Tom, but decided to leave it for the next day when my head would be clearer. But the week continued to surprise me. I found Tom in the living room of my parents' house, looking through my childhood photos with my dad. My dad was telling him when and where the pictures had been taken. I would have thought I was in a movie if I hadn't been standing in the doorway watching the scene unfold with my own eyes. Too many events for just a few days, don't you think? I know they saw me walk in, but they didn't pay attention to me for a few more minutes. Then my dad got up from the couch, greeted me, said he needed to help mom with the groceries, put on his coat, and left the house, leaving me alone with Tom. I still stood there in shock. Tom spoke first. Without getting up from the couch, he greeted me and asked how my visit to Amber's parents had gone. I kept silent and stared at him. Then he got up, poured me a glass of water, and told me to drink. I downed the whole glass, but still didn't speak. I just walked into the living room and sat on the couch. Tom understood I wasn't ready to talk, so he started first. He explained that he had been upset with me for a long time, but about 2 weeks ago, he realized he had to do everything he could to resolve the situation. It was important for him to understand if I had rejected him because I didn't have feelings for him or because of other people's prejudices. He made sure that no one except Ursula was against our relationship. It turned out that he had also spoken to Ursula and she had told him everything she had told me. He wasn't pleased with what she said, but despite that, he decided to come to see me. Since I was at Amber's parents' house, my parents greeted him. He talked to my dad about the situation, but didn't ask for his permission to be with me because, as he said, only I could decide that. In the end, he said that if I didn't have feelings for him, he would understand and never bother me again. But if I wanted to be with him, he would do everything to make sure no one said a word against us. I silently listened and thought about every word he said. He turned out to be much braver than me in the end. Yes, I had come back to life before he did, but he was ready to be happy here and now while I seemed to be looking for excuses to push him away, afraid to finally find happiness. Afraid to find happiness and lose it again. But it wasn't just my trauma from losing Adam that haunted me. There was also something more trivial and even funny, but still, it came up during my therapy session. When my therapist asked me to set aside the fear of others' disapproval and think about other things that scared me about the potential relationship with Tom, I of course said I was afraid of losing him like I lost Adam. When we discussed that fear, I realized there was another one, a rather silly one looking back now, but it was inside me and so it needed to be addressed. Amber was a tall blonde with a model-like European appearance, 178 centimeters. She was a very beautiful and striking girl. Many boys in our school were in love with her, but Amber wasn't the only one. Almost all of Thomas's ex-girlfriends that I knew of had a similar type. And then there's me, a brunette with Asian features, 168 centimeters with an average figure. I didn't fit Thomas's type at all. Yes, you might say that it's silly to compare myself like that because if someone truly loves you, looks become secondary. And I agree with you, but I think many people can understand that no matter how hard we fight our insecurities, they hit the hardest in our most vulnerable moments. But I couldn't allow myself to be stuck in my negative thoughts, and since Thomas was there, it was time to discuss everything. Gathering my courage, I spoke up. I told him about my feelings, my fears, and my concerns. He listened attentively and didn't laugh when I mentioned the comparison to his exes. Thomas said he was also afraid of losing me, but he couldn't live in that fear anymore. He wanted to live fully, and if I allowed it, he wanted to live with me and love me, but it was important to him that I loved him too. Of course, it's too early to talk about deep love in our situation, but our feelings are definitely not fleeting. As for my appearance, he said I was incredibly beautiful, always had been, and that my hair color or eye shape could never diminish his feelings for me. He even joked that he wasn't exactly a tall Asian man like Adam had been. We laughed and the atmosphere lightened up. Thomas asked if I was ready for a relationship, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't hesitate. I said yes and immediately hugged him. We sat like that for a few minutes before we heard the sound of my parents' car. The four of us had dinner together and laughed a lot, and I was happy that Tom had so easily gotten along with my parents. He kissed me when he left, not in front of my parents, of course, and asked me out for a date the next day. We were finally happy. Or rather, he was, and I wasn't entirely. That night, I kept thinking about Ursula and her words. It hurt me that she didn't share everyone else's opinion. One of you left a comment saying that she hadn't fully grieved her own loss yet, and I think that's true. When you have 3 kids to take care of, there's not always time for grieving and proper therapy. I don't blame her, but I'm not going to make excuses for her either. I decided to talk to her before Tom and I made things official. The next morning, I called her and asked to meet. We agreed to meet for lunch at a cafe. I expected her to be more negative, but she was calm. I told her about my conversation with Amber's mom, about my talk with Thomas, and about our decision. I could see that she was full of doubts. Surprisingly, she apologized for speaking so harshly to me and about Thomas. However, she also said that she hadn't changed her opinion and that for her, these feelings were wrong. She couldn't accept it, at least not right now. She didn't want to ruin anyone's life, so if Thomas and I had decided to be together, it would be better if we stopped communicating. My heart broke at that moment. Tears rolled down my cheeks, and I saw that her eyes were also wet. Ursula left, and I just sat in the cafe trying to hold back my tears. After paying, I quickly rushed home and barely made it through the rest of the day. It was probably a bad idea to see Ursula on the same day as my date with Thomas, but what's done is done. When I realized I couldn't handle the date, I told him exactly how I felt. He suggested I come to his place, and I cried in his arms all night. I know this isn't the kind of first date he dreamed of, nor did I, but I was once again convinced that I had made the right choice. I also told him about the post here, and he read all the comments and thanks everyone who shared their words of support. I'm finishing this post while he sleeps peacefully. It's midnight here now. We don't know what the future holds for us, but we'll do everything we can to be happy. And yes, I will move to his country soon. So this is likely the first and last update to this story. Once again, thank you to everyone. Be happy and goodbye. User Irreverent Therapist said, I'm so sorry for all the losses that you've gone through, including Ursula, but happy to see you healing and continuing to progress in your journey we call life. I wish you all the best in your future and hope that one day Ursula will be able to heal and be happy for the light you all found in darkness. User Minflick said, I do not like Ursula. Amber is dead and gone. She can't be hurt by her husband finding love again, nor can Adam. Life does not stop just because your spouse died. User Green Dragon 14 said, my cousin died suddenly. He was to marry his girlfriend 6 months later. She was devastated over losing him so suddenly. Our other cousin, who he was very close to, stepped up to take care of her during this time. Over time, they fell in love. Now, there may be some who didn't approve. They are now looking at a future together, and as his family, we couldn't be happier for them, as we know our cousin would be too. Go live your life and be happy.